Hannah Bardell.
It's a huge pleasure to speak in this debate, and I thank colleagues who've contributed, and also to the Petitions Committee and the petitioners who've raised such a crucial issue, which I have no doubt affects every constituency across this House. And I am going to declare an interest, Mr Mundell, as the co-chair of the newly reconvened Crohn's and Colitis All-Party Group, alongside my honourable friend, the Honourable Lady for Chesham and Amersham. And I am going to focus much of my comments on those particularly debilitating and devastating diseases. And I'm conscious that there will be many people watching at home who suffer from those diseases, and many other ones that are, by their very definition, relapsing and remitting. And I think there will be other diseases, I know, and those who suffer from them, that will not be able to fit into the very rigid box that the assessments for PIP and ESA quite often call for. So it's to them that I want to pay tribute, because I've spoken to a number of sufferers in recent days, but also, like many colleagues, are regularly representing constituents who suffer from debilitating diseases and unfortunately traumatic experiences with the social security system. And what I've heard is the incompatibility of disability benefits assessment services, because they take a static measure of the patient's pain and suffering for fluctuating illnesses. And Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis are conditions that fall under this category. They're lifelong immune-mediated diseases of the gut for which there is currently no known cure. And the symptoms include, and I will not apologise in advance, but I will put a little disclaimer on that some of these are quite descriptive and graphic. The symptoms include urgent and frequent diarrhoea, rectal bleeding, pain, profound fatigue, anemia and inflammation of the joints, skin, liver and eyes. 3 in 4 people with Crohn's and colitis experience bowel incontinence, an unpredictable and urgent need to pass stools. Currently, over 500,000 people live with Crohn's and colitis and ulcerative colitis in the UK. And one of those, Mr Mundell, I will declare an interest, is my brother. And my brother is fortunate that he does not have to access the welfare system, that he is able to manage his condition, which is relapsing and remitting, such that he is able to continue in full-time employment. But I have seen, since he was diagnosed just over 9 years ago, the struggles, the profound fatigue, the questions about what his future career, which has been somewhat curtailed, will look like, and the impact on his own partner and family, and even on my own mother, who worries, I know, daily about his condition and how it will potentially develop. So whilst these are incredibly serious, it's important to note in this debate that these are relapsing and remitting, meaning that the individual will have flare-ups that will often occur suddenly and unpredictably. There's also significant variation in the pattern of complexity of the symptoms, both between people and in the individual at different times in their life. Additionally, there are many additional costs associated with living with Crohn's and colitis, such as increased transport costs, heating, treatments and care. In 2022, Crohn's and Colitis UK received over 1,000 inquiries to the charity's helpline from people looking for information on available funding and support. Furthermore, information on PIP and benefits is within the top 10 of topics searched for on the charity's website. The one support available through the current benefit system is built on the concept of a disabled person with permanent and substantial impairment, or on the person with a long-term health condition which is likely to degenerate. There is little recognition in the system, Mr Mundell, of the person who has a long-term fluctuating health condition and the adverse effects that this has on the person's ability to work, undertake education and maintain their physical and mental health. And the PIP assessment guideline require assessors to consider fluctuation of symptoms in relation to the descriptors they use during the assessment. This is defined as the ability of a claimant to carry out activities being impacted by their condition at least 50% of those days. And that is one of the key points I want to raise with the Minister. So 2 of the people that I spoke with ahead of this debate, one is a personal friend, Rachel, and another is a constituent, Stephen Sharp. And Stephen has done a huge amount of work with Crohn's and colitis. And Stephen talked to me about his experience of the relapsing and remitting nature. Things like bag explosions or leaks in the middle of the night, having to clean himself up at 5 in the morning and then having to do a whole load of self-care and cleaning of sheets, etc. And the fact that that might be occasional, but when it happens, it's devastating. It's embarrassing. It's not something that he talks about very often, and I have his permission to talk about that. He talked about his work that he does with the local football team in Fallthouse in my constituency, and how just the other day he'd gone along to training and he was struggling to walk, that his joints were in, serious state of inflammation, and he was just really struggling. That's not necessarily an everyday occurrence for him, but it's something that happens. And it's impossible for people that have Crohn's and colitis to predict whether it's going to be 50% of the time. We cannot squeeze those folk into a one-size-fits-all box. And there are legal precedents for fluctuating symptoms being treated as constant symptoms. The legal test for determining whether or not a fluctuating symptom should be taken into consideration is found in the Equality Act of 2010. The nature of Crohn's and colitis means, as I've said, it's impossible to predict. It might mean that somebody has a different experience on a different day. And that arbitrary 50% rule is just not one that can work for folk with Crohn's and colitis. And I have no doubt many other diseases. Beyond this, PIP descriptors are also too rigid to adequately assess the impact of Crohn's and colitis. The PIP guidance frames incontinence in very limited terms, as points are awarded based on the need for assistance and aids. Specifically, these following phrases: toilet needs and incontinence. The descriptors and guidance fail to recognise the difference between types of toilet needs, including frequency of bowel movement, urgency and incontinence. It doesn't recognise the impact on independence, the ability to undertake daily tasks and employment when experiencing multiple bouts of urgency a day. And I know from personal experience, I know from talking to my friend Rachel, who has sadly had to have a stoma just so that she could survive and live, and has lost her bowel, who was experiencing chronic diarrhoea, vomiting, and who managed to get back to work but has sadly recently had to leave work and go completely onto benefits, that when she was speaking to the assessor, it was a really, really difficult experience for her. Yet when she was then engaging with the Scottish Service, she had somebody come out and actually see her at home, to spend the day with her, to understand the difference. And I appreciate what the Honourable Member for North Swinton said in his previous contributions, although I would challenge that, because certainly for those I've spoken to in terms of the Scottish system, it's very much more person-centred. And the toilet needs and incontinence phrases don't recognise the significant support that individuals with Crohn's and colitis may receive from carers or family, for example, support with cleaning themselves, washing clothes, bedding, etc., as I have mentioned. And in terms of mobility, PIP assessments describe mobility based on two activities: moving around and planning, and following journeys. And my constituent Stephen said he was asked whether he could tie shoelaces. Well, yes, he can tie shoelaces, but does he have explosive episodes in the middle of the night where he needs to clean himself up? Yes. But that doesn't fit into the very strict regime that the DWP are pursuing. And these strict and arbitrary measures of distance are not the best way to determine a person's mobility needs, regardless of their disability. I know from my brother's own experience of having to plan out a journey, knowing where public toilets are. We had a family that holiday in the Highlands of Scotland, and I remember when he was first diagnosed, him not knowing if he was going to be able to take his family on holiday because he couldn't guarantee that those toilets would be in place. He was in the position that he was able to be innovative and exchange his car for a truck that he was able to put a portaloo in the back of, which I thought was probably the most innovative response I'd ever seen to a chronic disease. But he was in a unique position to do that. We should not be asking people who've got chronic diseases to have to drive around with a toilet in the back of their car. That's just ridiculous. And a more flexible approach about moving around, which is grounded in a person's reality and considers a person's ability to move around, has to be one that the UK Government will consider. A more holistic approach to journey planning, which considers the difficulties day to day, would be much, much better for those who suffer. Because data from Crohn's and colitis shows that applicants found fatigue to be their most debilitating symptom. It was also the symptom that they felt least represented was least represented in their assessment. People with Crohn's and colitis who have experience of applying for PIP found their ability to effectively convey the impact of fatigue and pain as a result of their condition is dependent on the knowledge that health assessors have of the condition. And my constituent Stephen told me it was a mental health nurse that assessed him. The person clearly didn't have the requisite knowledge. They didn't really understand what they were talking about, and he ended up not receiving his benefits and has made a decision not to apply again. And I think that is a really sad example of somebody who has a genuinely debilitating condition and is being denied their benefits. And what's more, in the recent inquiry that we've heard other members speak about, exploring the issue of DWP health assessments, the Work and Pensions Committee requested that the government confirm whether it was still reviewing the PIP descriptors, and if not, what evidence it's found of those currently in use and are fit for purpose. As I understand it, the government are yet to present this. So I do call on the government to refine the descriptors to reflect the very real and debilitating impact of Crohn's and colitis on people's lives. This should include a review of incontinence, mobility and objective scales to measure the fatigue and pain. Assessment for disability benefits don't need to be this way, Mr Bardell. As we have heard and as we know in Holyrood, the SNP-led government have pursued a social security system with the principles of dignity, fairness and respect at their heart. And the new adult disability payment is delivering an entirely new, simplified, compassionate experience for disabled people and was designed in partnership with people who use it. Their input was absolutely at the heart of the processes and the service that we have developed. And the Scottish Government have abolished the controversial DWP assessments and instead hold person-centred consultations. This stands in contrast to the UK Government's system, and as those here have indicated earlier, it's punitive, unflexible and, most importantly, unfit for purpose. According to a recent report, the data on mandatory reconsiderations and appeals show that there's still a fundamental problem with decision-making. 69% of DWP decisions were overturned at tribunal. That's nearly 70%. In the quarter ending December 2022. That's not just a massive waste of money, Mr Bardell, that's a massive waste of the time of the civil servants and those administering it, but most importantly, it's re-traumatising those who have chronic conditions. And I have to tell you, those who I've spoken to in recent days and those who I've dealt with through my constituency office have talked to me about the trauma that they have experienced. And we are judged, I believe, as a government, as nations, on how we treat the most vulnerable. And we are not treating the most vulnerable people through these assessments, through this system, with the proper dignity and respect that they deserve. Thank you.
Charlotte Nichols.
Thank you, Mr Bardell. It's a pleasure to serve